Hello, everyone. If you are interested in listening in, tapping into the NBA world here on SDPN Sports, you can listen to the Objective Basketball Podcast with Lauren Gunn and myself. Last week, we interviewed Caitlin Cooper and Sean Hynek on the Indiana Pacers and Portland Trailblazers, respectively. You can tap in. Obviously, please subscribe and like those videos and podcasts, if you will. Obviously, give us a great rating on Apple and Spotify if you must. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel on SDPN Sports. We talk about the NBA throughout the week. We also have shows that talk about the NFL and NHL if you are interested in those as well. Now, for the topic at hand. Happy holidays, everybody. Hope you guys had a great holiday season. Merry Christmas if you do, in fact, celebrate. And if you're listening to this after the New Year's, I hope you had a great New Year's. Hope 2024 is going to be the best year possible for you. If you're listening to this before the New Year, then I hope you have a great New Year's Eve. I hope you celebrate responsibly. And yes, of course, I hope you have a great 2024. I hope all of us do have a great 2024. I hope one of the players on the Toronto Raptors ends up being an all-star. Maybe we'll get into that in a little bit. Since it is the new year, it's sort of a good time for reflection. And I think since we're about a third of the way through the NBA season, it'd be a good time to talk about reflection from the Toronto Raptors and sort of zoom out and look at their year in entirety. Not just the start of this season, but the summer, even the year beforehand, and kind of see where they're at and see what they must do in 2024. Their New Year's resolution, how they must be able to change and evolve in the new year. One thing that they have to keep in mind, and the one thing I would say for the Toronto Raptors, their New Year's resolution has to be not to pick a direction, because there is no direction to pick, to subside to the direction that is being forced onto them. That is what the Toronto Raptors must do. And the reason I say that is because a lot of the times when we look at this like sunk cost fallacy, right? If you've dug in to a certain thing, you have to dig down on it and dig yourself a deeper and deeper hole. Well, the sunk cost fallacy is the idea that you don't have to actually keep digging yourself into this hole. You can give up that strategy, go a different direction, and then hopefully that will find, you know, kind of a new solution, a new pathway. You build a different road for yourself by kind of giving up the initial strategy that you had. And so I think the Toronto Raptors are in a position where they have to look at themselves over this last year and really over the last 10 years of the Pascal Siakam era. Pascal, for all his intents and purposes, is going to go down as an all-time Raptor. I tweeted this before. I think Pascal is a top 5 Raptor all-time, joining Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan, Kawhi Leonard, and Vince Carter. I think it's those guys as the pantheon, if you will, Mount Rushmore, whatever, of Raptors legends, of Raptors greats. That is Pascal. No question in my mind about that. You know, he just passed the 500 game mark for Raptors. All of those, obviously, with the franchise. He is only him and Kyle Lowry are the only guys in points, rebounds, and assists in terms of top 5 for the franchise. He is going to have his name etched in stone for literally most of the awards, most of the categories that the Raptors are going to try to prop up for being one of the greatest Raptors ever. 2-time All-NBA, 2-time All-Star, one of the greatest development stories in recent history for the NBA. Genuinely one of the best stories developmentally that we've probably seen ever in the NBA. Up there with the likes of Giannis and Kawhi and other guys that you might mention in NBA history as well. So Pascal's story, the way he's grown into a superstar, a star, if you will, I don't want to jump ahead of myself, in the NBA is a great, great sign for the Toronto Raptors. A great sign of how they developed a guy like that, you know, from the 2016 draft. His era, though, can be marked, unfortunately, by the failures of building around a guy like Pascal Siakam. You look at his positives as a player, a guy who can create for himself. He's grown into some sort of an offensive engine. His great mid-range pull-up game, his ability to drive to the basket, his ability to create shots for others, his post-up game. All of these are potent areas of what Pascal can do on a night-to-night basis. But unfortunately, some of the other areas of his game, in order to accentuate his strengths, has not been doubled down. The shooting is a clear indication of this. The Raptors have been bottom 10 in three-point percentage for the last 3 seasons. They just haven't been able to find enough spacing, and Pascal, for a lot of reasons, has had to operate in a phone booth of space over his tenure with the Raptors, which makes what he's done so far that much more impressive. The fact that he has been a 2-time All-NBA player, fact that he's been a 2-time All-Star, despite the pretty awkward fit for him on this roster goes to show you just how incredible he is as a basketball player and what he might look like when given that opportunity, when given that space. Caitlin Cooper on the Objective Basketball podcast, she brought up a really good point. She likened Siakam to sliding a sheet of paper through the bottom of a door, which is just like, that's how he operates. That's exactly the type of spacing that he has to work with. And it's been unfortunate because it hasn't led to a lot of success in the Pascal Siakam era for the Toronto Raptors. If you look at that era as a whole, and I guess you can really count the bubble season as part of the Pascal Siakam era, although that obviously is also still part of the Kyle Lowry era, if you will. But if we were to count that, the Raptors have been in 3 playoff series in the Pascal era. The Brooklyn Nets won in the bubble, the Boston Celtics won in the bubble, and the Philadelphia 76ers won just a couple of years ago. We can count the play-in game against the Chicago Bulls as well, but I don't think either me or you want to really count that game. That being said, it hasn't been a successful era for the Raptors as a whole under Pascal Siakam. And it's unfortunate because, revisionist history, maybe 10, 15 years from now, people will look at this era and say, oh, well, he wasn't good enough, or, oh, well, he wasn't good enough to take them over the hump. And it really, that hasn't been the case. This team just hasn't suited him much in this tenure. Fred VanVleet, who was, became an all-star himself, obviously one of the greater developmental stories as well in the NBA recently, has become a really, really good starting point guard in the NBA now. I think he was a really, really good example of what fit could be around Pascal, a guy who can be a good pull-up shooter, a good catch and shoot shooter, a good point of attack defender, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Fred's body started to break down towards the end of his Raptors tenure. He's playing a little bit lesser of a role in Houston, and he's doing so successfully. Like, he's doing a great job in Houston right now, showing off, kind of getting the other guys involved in Şengün, turning him into an all-star. Jabari Smith Jr. has played really well as well. So ultimately, there was a fit there, and the Raptors decided not to do that. Now, we'll get into that in a bit. I actually don't think that was that big of a mistake, but ultimately, when you look at the Raptors in the Kyle Lowry era, which is the most successful era of Raptors basketball ever, right? So it's about 2014 to 2020. They're obviously near the top of the league when it comes to win percentage among all franchises in that era. They won themselves an NBA championship. Shout out to Kawhi Leonard as well. That is the most successful era of Raptors basketball ever by a wide margin, right? And I think the reason that happened was because the Raptors consistently won around the margins. You think of the Rudy Gay trade that turned into Grievous Vasquez, Patrick Patterson, Chuck Hayes, and John Salmons, right? They later turned Grievous Vasquez into OG Anunoby and Norm Powell. Those guys, OG Anunoby, 20th overall pick, Norm Powell, second round pick, hitting on those later draft picks. They turned Terrence Ross, which was one of their high lottery picks, I believe 9th pick, into Serge Ibaka, played an integral role in the Raptors championship, one of the most liked Raptors of all time. The Raptors used to be very active, and now they're reactive in the sense that they are consistently reacting to the way that this league is going versus before. They were making moves pretty much every single deadline or every single offseason. They were aggressive in adding or taking away from the roster, making tweaks in order to improve it. So far, it seems like they have failed in that category. Their recent, draft margin error things, if you want to call them, just the kind of failing around the margins. Drafting Malachi Flynn, 29th overall, David Johnson, Delano Banton, Jalen Harris, DeJuan Hernandez, just in terms of second round picks. The Raptors haven't been nailing the marginal picks around the team, which makes it that much harder when the team is depleted of talent. So when you think of letting Fred VanVleet walk, when you think of waiting until the summer in order to do a sign and trade for Kyle Lowry versus trading him at the deadline, you're essentially saying we are okay in terms of the talent that we have, but they haven't hit on the talent that they've drafted. And that's a really, really important thing to note because they haven't been able to recoup their asset pool, recoup their talent pool while also losing all of this talent. So that has hurt them tremendously in this era. And not to mention the picks that they couldn't even make, right? Because they traded those picks. You think of the Thad Young deal, which would have technically been Malachi Branham instead of Christian Koloko. Now we'll see what happens with Christian and his future. Obviously, it's up in the air right now, but for the most part, a higher lottery pick is obviously going to be better. You look at that Thad Young trade and say, maybe that wasn't the right move to do at the time to go and win now in that moment. You look at last year's trade, which is the Jakob trade, and I kind of want to contextualize that for people. So February 7th, the day before the trade deadline last year, and this is where we get into our year review of the 2023 season, 2023 year for the Toronto Raptors. They were 25-30 at the deadline. They were, I believe it was the Spurs, the Lakers, and one other team that were under them in terms of record that year. That means that they had a pretty good shot at maybe letting go of the rope a little bit and getting themselves in the room for a top 5, top 6, top 7 pick. That didn't happen, obviously. They traded for Jakob Poeltl. They got their center of the future. They traded away a first-round pick, top 6 protected, and that also plays a part into their future. We'll get into that in a second. They did so, and they decided not to tank. They got to a playing spot, lost to the Chicago Bulls, ended up with the 13th overall pick, drafted Grady Dick. Now, we don't know how those things are going to work out yet, right? We don't know if Grady is going to turn into a whatever player, if he's not going to be a good player, whatever. We actually don't know that, and I'm not going to get into that conversation right now. I saw that conversation on Twitter the other day. It's a ridiculous conversation to have 20 games into a person's rookie year. Let's just scrap that in. Let's just ignore that for a second because we really don't know with Grady Dick. Yes, there are other rookies that are outperforming him, but I'm going to give him the time to figure things out in his career. When you look at that move, buying instead of selling or instead of just kind of staying put, it really hurt the Toronto Raptors. And I don't mean in terms of acquiring Jakob Poeltl. I think Jakob Poeltl was important for this team. I think getting a center is ultimately a really important thing to do. Getting a starting center is a really important thing to do. But when that starting center doesn't necessarily fit your front court players in a Pascal, in a Scottie Barnes, you leave yourself open to vulnerability and flaws offensively. And I think there's just a level of flexibility that you can't get to when all three of your forwards are lackadaisical shooters. Now, I know Scotty Barnes has turned himself into a really good catch and shoot player, 39% on over 5 attempts a game. Really, really good sign, really good indication that like in the future, he'll end up being a really good shooter. And maybe this season, this number stays at 39%, which would be incredible. Not to take away from that at all, but teams are still not respecting Scotty's shot. And the spacing is still very, very cramped together because of that 3-man front court that has no shooting. And I think ultimately you look at that and you say, well, maybe if there was a player that fit the mold of what Scotty could look like in the future, maybe a player that could match what Pascal and Scottie Barnes could be and kind of complement those guys as a center. I think of like Kristaps Porzingis, I think of Miles Turner, guys who can stretch the floor, block shots, etc. If it was that type of player, you can maybe sell yourself on the idea. But with Jakob, because of his limitations offensively and how he works next to Pascal and Scotty, it's tougher to sell yourself on the idea of giving up a first-round pick, let alone a first-round pick that limits you for 3 drafts, 2024, 2025, and 2026. They want this draft, they want this pick to convert. That should be the goal for the Toronto Raptors. And so in terms of New Year's resolutions, you look at what's happening, what's left for this team. They're 11-18 right now. 16 of their next 22 games before the deadline are on the road. They have 2 massive West Coast road trips, which are always tough, and they are 3-9 on the road. So they have struggled as a whole on the road. And if we look back at last year, where they were 25-30, 5 games under 500, and they bought instead of sold, I'm saying I'm looking into the new year. The New Year's resolution that I have for this team is to subside, is to not buy. And I think in general, you're looking at the Raptors who looked at 2023, their 2022-2023 season and said, well, we have to buy. We have to be in a position to win. I think there's a way that they can still be competitive this year, despite moving one of their 2 players. The 2 guys are obviously Pascal and OG, both guys who are going to be unrestricted free agents this year. There's going to be a lot of conversation about both of those guys and which way they go. In that sense, they do have a direction they have to pick because they can't keep both of them. It's just unfortunate because the sad reality is they don't have a margin in order to tweak around those guys between Pascal, Scotty, and OG. And with Scotty's extension going to be kicking in soon, they're going to probably sign him to a max extension this summer. Precious Achiuwa is extension eligible. Their money is going to get even more tight for this team, and they are not going to dip into the luxury tax for a team that is 11-18 or 25-30. Regardless, they're just not going to do that. And that was the main reason why they didn't extend Fred VanVleet this summer to $44 million, because they knew that money was going to be really, really tight moving forward for this team. So they do have to pick between Pascal and OG. In that sense, there is a direction that they have to choose. And in my opinion, I think the clear answer has to be that they have to pick OG. I can hear the arguments for keeping one or the other because I'm a sensible human being and I can understand both sides. In my opinion, though, I think I would rather keep OG in this scenario just because of his age, the proximity to Scotty Barnes, his ability to play off of Scotty Barnes as a three-point shooter, as a perimeter defender. And I think given where this team is headed, you're going to have the extra on-ball reps, the extra usage available to give to OG to make him happier with his role. Have those reps gone successfully? For the most part, not really, to be honest with you. But I think this year he has improved as a driver. He has improved as a playmaker. And I think I would like to see him more in a secondary role as well. Ultimately, Pascal is not going to net you as much as OG this trade deadline. That's just the matter of fact. OG is a younger player. He's a more sought-after player. He's a more sought-after asset. I hate using that word, but that's just the matter of fact here. More teams will want a player like OG Anunoby. And so that's why I understand the other side of the argument, which is like, hey, just keep Scotty and Pascal together. Those two play very, very well next to each other, regardless of the shooting and spacing fit issues. And go and trade OG for guys that complement those guys even better. Go trade him for a bunch of shooters and guards that can complement these guys. Go trade them for a big man that can stretch the floor. I understand that argument. And I think that's a fair case to pay. I'm not sure which way the Raptors go in that scenario. I would imagine they prefer to trade Siakam over OG just because of how much they've touted OG over the last couple of years. And also just from me hearing different rumors and things like that, just how much they've tried to move Siakam over the summer. There were multiple deals in place that fell through either because of Siakam's unwillingness to re-sign with that team or the team's unwillingness to give up the assets for an expiring Pascal Siakam. I imagine that's a hurdle that they're going to run around and kind of come to it at this deadline as well as teams try to assess Siakam's willingness to re-sign with them. And that's something that they're going to have to come across. Like that's something that they're going to have to deal with. But that's also the position that they've put themselves in. And so back to the sunk cost fallacy, you can't keep digging yourself a hole. And for me, this New Year's resolution for this team is to let it be bad. let this thing go the way it is clearly headed, in the sense that they're 11-18. They have 16 of the next 22 games on the road. Going after this and doubling down on this would be mismanagement in the highest regard. But doubling down on this and saying we're not going to do anything might just be as bad, in the sense that you're going to let go of two of your main assets here in a Pascal and potentially an OG. It's a dangerous game to play going into the free agency. And I honestly do think that Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster understand this. I think they know what's at stake here, given the fact that they have two of their three best players potentially walking away this summer. That's just something that they can't do. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the New Year's resolution for the Toronto Raptors needs to be not to pick a direction, because that direction has already been written for them. It's just to let that direction happen. That's essentially it, folks. They got to just pick something. And it's weird because I keep saying the word pick because they don't really have an option here. They have to inevitably trade one of these guys. It just matters on who and why and which way they're going to go. The one silver lining, ladies and gentlemen, heading into 2024, and this is a New Year's resolution, maybe something to keep an eye on for 2025, is to not make the same mistakes that they made with the Pascal Siakam era. Understand the qualities and the traits and the strengths of a player like Scotty Barnes. who will actually sign with you for that max free agent rookie max extension. He'll be on this roster for another 5 years. How are you going to maximize Scottie Barnes in the next 5 seasons? That is the question you have to keep in mind, heading into the summer. Scottie Barnes is a player, this playmaking big man, forward type, point forward type, has grown as a shooter, obviously grown as a scorer. I believe he can tap into the free throw game a little bit more, growing as a scorer. I think in general, all-star is a fair assessment for what Scottie Barnes has turned himself into. That is the major silver lining with this team this season, regardless of their record, regardless of the struggles. And you don't want to make those same mistakes that you did with Pascal. That's all it is. So maybe that's 2025's New Year's resolution. But for 2024, the thing is, pick a direction, ladies and gentlemen. That's where the Toronto Raptors are at. And that is the New Year's resolution. Thank you so much for tapping in. As always, if you'd like to listen to the Objective Basketball Podcast, it is pretty cool. We talk about a lot of NBA things outside of the Toronto Raptors. And if you'd like to, please subscribe to SDPN's YouTube channel. We talk about all things NBA, all things NFL, all things NHL. All right. Take care, guys.